Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Dr. Laurie Nadel, and she's here to share with us her new book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes. Now, Dr. Laurie is a psychologist, journalist, and best-selling author who specializes in helping people recover from trauma. In Long Beach, New York, she runs a support group at City Hall for people who are traumatized by losing their homes to Hurricane Sandy. At Metropolitan Communication Associates in Manhattan, she works with patients who have had traumatic brain injuries due to assault, rape, MS, and stroke. During 2003 and 2005, she directed a program for teenagers whose fathers were killed on 9/11. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Laurie Nadel.
Hey, thank you so much for having me as your guest. I really appreciate it.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here with us today. And your book, The 5 Gifts, once I picked it up, your book grabbed me. I could not put it down. It is a page turner.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a great compliment for any writer. I say to people, sit in a room for a year and you write, and then you send the book off to the publisher, and then you wonder, is anybody ever going to read it? Is it going to move people? Is it any good? So I'm deeply grateful that you find it well written and easy to read.
Wow, It's making a huge impact. It's easy to see why the book is getting such great reviews and why people are flocking to this book, because it's exactly, and in many ways kind of unfortunately, but it's exactly what we need right now, because people, they get to this point where tragedy strikes and it's like, okay, now what do I do? How do I feel?
Well, people feel confused because these are turbulent times. And we've lived, as one of my friends in England said, we've never had a war on our territory. We have had terrorist incidents, but we haven't experienced, long periods of hardship and adversity in our lifetimes. And I think that right now the cycle of turbulence is kicking up so much uncertainty and instability that we really need to learn from other countries and other cultures what kind of values, what kind of thinking do we need in order to be able to accept the unacceptable or accept what has been traditionally not part of our experience. And we can incorporate these new ways of thinking or these values or beliefs so that we can stay balanced when things really start to become very unsteady, which they are right now.
Yeah. Well, the book, The 5 Gifts, starts really with your story and what you have gone through. And you write in such a vivid way that I personally felt like I was sharing this experience for you. So for people who maybe haven't gone through, let's say, having your home flooded, like as you discussed, it's a real, it's kind of jarring in some ways just to see what the expectation level is.
Right. It's unfortunately, because of various reasons, whether you call it climate change or an act of God, we're in a very turbulent climate cycle of extreme weather and changes to the baseline temperature and stability in the climate. I guess I kind of want to phrase it that way, because climate change is kind of a buzzword. And whether or not you believe, quote unquote, in climate change, the evidence is here that we're in a cycle of increasing turbulence and instability, from the wildfires in California to hurricanes and blizzards and tornadoes increasing. And that's just in our country that we're familiar with, but it's also happening in Europe, and it's happening in South America, and it's happening in Asia. This is a global situation that's affecting people all over the world. In this country, for various reasons that we don't understand yet, we're seeing an increase in what we call intentional disasters, and these are these horrible, human-to-human attacks, whether they're shootings or attempted bombings or even September 11th would be considered an intentional disaster where one human is trying to do as much damage to as many people as possible. And we're seeing an increase in that kind of violence as well. And when we live through that, or even if we witness it indirectly on television, we're deeply affected by this. There's such a thing as vicarious or secondary trauma. And if we spend hours and hours watching images of that are violent, it will cause us to feel unsettled and afraid. So the anxiety levels, research shows that our anxiety levels are way up over even a year ago. And so I wrote the book to basically help people to see that there are things that they can do to help to take the edge off the sense of helplessness and panic.
Well, and it does such a great job with that. It also explains, what, some of the society's norm as far as expectation for us. Like when someone goes through a tragedy, it talks about that 3-month period that society, kind of expects for you to, okay, now you've gone through this, it's 3 months, you should be back at it, should be working away or, getting back to normal.
Right. Well, there's a health cycle, and the health cycle normally lasts 2 to 3 months, and that's when people experience that kind of outpouring of empathy, and rescue workers come in, and volunteers come in, and the American Red Cross and other organizations and churches and volunteers, disaster mental health workers come in, to help people with the immediate shock. And then, they get called away either because, that's the time that they finished the assignment, or because they've been called away. If we saw this summer, we had Hurricane Florence, which is a mega disaster in North Carolina, and then less than a month later, Hurricane Michael. And a lot of the FEMA people, the search and rescue people, the insurance adjusters got reassigned from Florence to Pensacola, Florida, and Hurricane Michael area. And so you see that people in the first tragedy are abandoned, and their needs are no longer being addressed fully. And so they still have to make survival decisions in shock. But they find that they've been more or less abandoned, and they have to navigate through both the financial terrain and the legal terrain and the psychological terrain, which is completely unknown to most of us until we have to deal with it. And the support that you thought would be there, based on the outpouring of goodwill and empathy and assistance that comes with the first 2 or 3 months, suddenly people's attention is diverted. And, and I've heard this from people in a number of different places, like after a few months, people who are just starting to process the nature of what happened feel that they're abandoned. They're abandoned by the media. They're no longer, front and center in terms of publicity and public attention, and they still have a long road ahead. So that's another reason why I wrote the book, because the process of healing emotionally, the process of recovering, so that the event or the tragedy doesn't dominate your thoughts from the moment you wake up. It takes a few years. It can take 3 to 5 years to, we call it metabolize or digest the unthinkable.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you wrote this book, The 5 Gifts, because a lot of times people just don't know how long this takes. And there's this expectation that, people will, get through this, it'll happen quickly. And you're right. By the time one tragedy happens, we've got these, ones that's just kind of back to back to back. So it's kind of hard for people to really focus in on what's happening, let's say with people in California with the wildfires, while they're, also looking at hurricanes that have been happening.
Right. And then, there are also, as I said, the human disasters, which don't follow any kind of a pattern or cycle whatsoever, but they can they seem to erupt at any time, and they do divert a lot of attention away from the what you call it, the current or the pre-existing disaster, like the fire or the natural disaster. It gets kind of upstaged by the newest incident, especially if it's a mass shooting or something horrendous that involves loss of life that's deliberate. And one of the things about a natural disaster is that it's an act of nature, it's an act of God, it's kind of random. It's unpredictable. Your house might get flooded, your next door neighbor might not take on any water. This happens all the time, and you talk to people who have experienced loss during a hurricane. Well, I lost everything, but my neighbor just had an inch of water in her garage. And so we talk about, say, the process of forgiving. It's kind of easier to forgive the weather than it is to forgive a human being who deliberately walked into a place and started shooting, or who threw a bomb or tried to blow himself up or herself up in a public space. So, the emotional process is a little bit different, but, we're just bombarded with these. And I would like to say that, I worked in a newsroom for 20 years. I worked in different newsrooms. The last decade of my career was spent at CBS News. And it really struck me one day as I was looking at all these monitors that had footage coming in. And this was, 20 years. I call it the BI era, before Internet. So a newsroom was really a nerve center, and you'd look at these satellite feeds coming in, and you'd see, bombing in Beirut, and you'd see a building collapse in India, and you'd see a construction accident in Chicago, and a plane accident over here, and you would just keep looking at all of the, we call them hard news events, but they're really, one disaster after another. And as I was looking at all of them, I really was struck by how much suffering that there was, and began to recognize that there would really be a need for people to have support so they could recover from these life-shattering events. It used to kind of started to come up organically after I had a baby, that these were real people and that their lives were never going to be the same. And I think we forget that because we get numb to seeing these images as soon as you turn on your cell phone or your tablet or your computer or your television. This is something that greets us every morning, and people are kind of numb to it. And so when it happens to you, you can't swipe it away. You can't change the channel, and you don't know what to do. And that really led me to write the book.
Is that what led you to, in many ways, like your career change as well? Because you've been working with people for quite some time now that have gone through different tragedies.
Yes, it was kind of an organic process although to take like 4 or 5 years to get my degrees through independent study after I left the news business. But I really saw it as a transition of wanting to be useful after years of kind of just writing and producing hard news, which are these 30-second to 1 minute clips that you see, videos that you see on TV or on Yahoo News or wherever you get your news source. To want to be able to make some kind of contribution to healing, especially to help people who had suffered something that was sudden and unexpected, and which altered their life in some significant way.
Yeah, and most people don't realize. These clips that a lot of times that producers are reviewing and editing. There's a lot in there that gets edited out, so that way it's appropriate for TV. So the person that's doing this work is seeing a lot of this trauma, and it could be really difficult.
I think that when I started, I really would have nightmares at night about the images of Vietnam and the images of Biafra, the Biafran War back in the 60s. And I would actually have dreams about the outtakes, the film that physically ended up on the cutting room floor. And it really bothered me, and I thought I was probably too sensitive for TV news. And then over time, you develop certain professional skills, and you learn how to detach sufficiently to be able to look at the images of suffering and be able to do your work in a nice, clean way to present information and not to sensationalize. At least in those days, those were the goals. And over time, I found that cumulatively, after say 15 years, it really did start to affect me on more of a gut level.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would do that for anybody. I know in your book you talk about being able to, kind of view these situations as a first responder would, so it just doesn't eat at your core.
First responders have to deal with these life and death situations, very disturbing scenes, some of which are quite graphic, I know, in my chapter 3, which talks about, how first responders cope with kind of life and death, injured, wounded, strange accidents, and really very harsh scenarios that they have to deal with on a day-by-day basis, especially when a kid dies. That's extremely difficult for a young firefighter or a paramedic or a police officer to be able to process, because they usually have their own families at home. And so there is a movement among the first responder community called the Critical Incident Stress Foundation, or CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management Movement, which has been creating a safe process, a confidential process for first responders to debrief and to talk about their reactions immediately after an event that they found disturbing. Like, for example, as I said, when a child dies, or an event like any kind of a mass shooting where the first responders are going to be looking at dead bodies or innocent people wounded or suffering, and they're going to be experiencing also what the crowd is going through, what the witnesses are going through. These are highly charged events, and one of the great, blessings or gifts of the critical incident stress management movement, from my perspective as a clinician, is that it provides an available way for professionals to be able to talk about what they see, what they hear, what they sense, what they perceive, without any kind of judgment, without being judged, and with the understanding that, it's human to be upset. It doesn't make you less professional. It's human to be disturbed when you see, acts of violence, or you go in after a disaster like the Camp Fires, and you're picking up the wounded and the dead. It is upsetting. It's graphic, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that you find it deeply disturbing. As one firefighter said, sometimes it stays with you in ways that you don't expect.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to a point in your book, The 5 Gifts. You talk about some very disturbing trends that are taking place. And I was really shocked by the statistics when you were pulling that information for your book. Was that surprising to you as well?
I mean, there's one that I keep returning to, which is a study by the National Wildlife Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It's by 2025, that's just, 7 years from now, more than 200 million Americans will experience some kind of mental health damage due to natural disasters that are increasing in frequency and intensity. So that means an increase in depression, anxiety, substance abuse, PTSD, as we're seeing in Puerto Rico. Even suicide rates are soaring. There have also been studies by the National Institutes of Health that show the long-term health effects of being under acute stress after any kind of disaster or combat or any kind of violence, especially in a cycle of violence. That 20 to 30 years from now, people can begin to experience heart problems, gastrointestinal problems, high blood pressure, hypertension, cardiac issues, diabetes, anything with an itis, anything that's got an inflammatory aspect to it can come up later on and be directly, apparently, according to the research, directly connected to the stress levels in the body that we experience as a result of going through catastrophic events. And so there's a mental health piece where I really think that we already have a public health epidemic of acute stress, which are the first 3 months after these events, and the long-term kind of chronic, what we call post-traumatic stress, and the other things that stem from that, as I said, which can include substance abuse, severe depression, an increase in suicide, and just kind of a failure to thrive. And as 200 million people, as we approach that particular number, that's a population the size of Texas. And if that's not a public health epidemic, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, and it's interesting, you and I were talking a little bit before our discussion here in regards to just how many people have been touched by some sort of tragedy, either it's natural, man-made. We all know somebody who's either been affected or has passed or has gone through a tragedy that has happened. And we look at this, just and how this affects people that the population and the people that we are here. And it's not like not happening in my neighborhood anymore. I mean, it's happening really to each and every one of us. And
it's also not happening to them as in, on the other side of the world. I mean, it used to be, when I was working, in the newsroom, say in the 70s and 1980s or even the 1960s, a lot of these really severe events were happening in other countries. And, there was a kind of geographic distance. It took the film maybe 2 days to get to New York or London. So there was always kind of a time delay in how you thought about what you were seeing. But now, with satellite technology and digital access, I mean, we can see things happening in real time. And that itself has kind of changed the way we look at ourselves globally. And it's also changed the way I think we perceive time and space, because there's an immediacy to each and every one of these events. There's an urgency that gives us a feeling that what happened to that person could happen to any one of us. And I think that's the thing that kind of stays with me or has stayed with me in working with people over the last 30 years, is the realization that, it doesn't just happen over there, that anything that happened to you could happen to me.
And you are kind of a very good example of somebody who's been involved in people that have gone through tragedy. I know you were working with teens after September 11th and just helping them to connect.
That's right. Teenagers, and I say this, with all due respect to everyone involved in the Never Again movement, but many teenagers don't like to grieve in public. If you have a teenager, if you live with a teenager, they don't want to be seen as different or special. They're more likely to isolate at a certain point and, close the door and not want to talk about it. And after September 11th, there were quite a few kids who wouldn't speak about it at home. And I think when I started the program, it was actually 2 years after 9/11, And some of those kids had never spoken about it with their moms at all. And so what I did I hope that I did, was to create activities and events where they could connect with each other. And they could look at each other, they could be there for each other. A lot of our activities revolved around sports. So we were together through 3 baseball seasons. And eventually the older boys started coaching the younger boys in baseball because the younger kids no longer had their dads to help coach them after school for Little League. And so there was something very beautiful about the bonding and connection that grew up naturally just by giving these kids safe opportunities to be together with each other.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Laurie Nadel on her new book, The 5 Gifts. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with Dr. Laurie Nadel, and she's sharing with us her new book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes. Dr. Laurie, in your book, there's a section that talks about how you were able to make these connections with the children whose fathers had passed away during 9/11. You talk about how the process was very organic, and it was really difficult for people to connect with these children.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it was funny, when I was hired, they'd already tried, the World Trade WTC Family Center had hired, experts and, academics and people with, kind of more formal clinical experience in adolescent bereavement. And everybody had kind of struck out. And so my boss he said he was skeptical that I would be able to reach these. And nobody seems to be able to reach these kids. But I was a single mom, and I had actually, kind of been raising a teenager, so I kind of felt like I'd survived, as a single mom, and understood a little bit about how teenagers, what they need actually, and what's important to them. And I was also able to connect with the moms, because if you think about it, the morning of September 11th, husbands went to work and the kids had a father, and then by the end of the day, these women were widows and single mothers, like all of a sudden. And, they had no time to prepare. And, being a parent to a teenager, whether you're co-parenting or whether you're on your own, raising teenagers is a white knuckle ride at the best of times. Teenagers are wonderful. I love being with teenagers, but they're unpredictable, and they don't necessarily want to open up about what's going on inside their own private world. And so it really was very moving to see the kids come together with each other.
What a beautiful, it really is a beautiful story in your book. And there are many others that are difficult to read and heart-wrenching. And that what I really appreciate about your book is you also have, I think it provides great hope for people that are looking to, kind of get beyond what pains they've been through. Because, we get to this point where we're kind of like, okay, I've been through this tragedy. Now what? Now what do I do?
Well, certainly wasn't an easy book to write, but it's definitely, I know it's not an easy book to read. It's not light reading. Yet it was my intention. I'm speaking to people who had come through, unspeakable tragedies, and I find it's interesting because we watch these things, we watch these events and these stories and the aftermath and the news, and you think about something as massive as the Rwandan genocide, where millions of people were massacred with machetes, in like a 2-month period. And how do people get through something like that? But yet the people of Rwanda have really spearheaded and pioneered one of the great reconciliation movements in the world, and we can learn from how they have come together to heal. Or South Africa, where they went through decades of the most brutal repression, dictatorship, and apartheid, and yet, we have these great leaders, Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu, who, again, were world leaders in the movement to learn how to forgive those who were our oppressors. And I just think that there's so much that we can learn from people in other countries, whether it's people in Europe who had to start over again psychologically after the Second World War, or people who escaped from repressive regimes in communist regimes. I have a couple of stories of people who escaped from the Soviet Union in East Germany, or indigenous people who have been living with centuries of oppression and poverty and discrimination. And we have so much to learn that's inspiring from people who have had to develop a mindset that allows them to get through adversity and hardship without feeling like victims. I think that that's what I hope is the most hopeful message of the 5 gifts, that we're survivors. We're not victims. It wasn't our fault. We couldn't prevent what happened, but we can learn, we can grow, we can emerge, as Ernest Hemingway said, stronger in the broken places.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt. It's interesting when you share your own story. You talk about what you went through, and there was a point where the worry just kind of faded away and everything just clicked for you in a spiritual way. You're like, okay, whatever's going to be is going to be, and you went with it. And it's interesting. Was it at that point that you were able to develop what the 5 gifts are, or is that something that came over time?
Well, the 5 gifts came to me while I was meditating. And, the first few months, I'm talking to people in California, and, the shock of dealing with a very impersonal and insensitive and sometimes dishonest, broken system, the insurance system, the insurance industry, if you will, the government, the bank that holds your mortgage, that seizes your insurance settlement check and puts it in escrow, and dealing with contractors and builders who come in, sometimes not always reputable, not always honest. So you have to make these survival decisions and navigate this minefield while you're in shock. And these things that you would never, in your whole life, would not imagine some of the things that could happen, which really threaten your financial survival. It can threaten everything that you've built for yourself. It can threaten your ability to rebuild and come back. A lot of people end up walking away. They just give up their property. They give up their homes. They give up their lives because they just can't deal with the abusiveness or the kind of harrowing experience of having to fight for every dollar that they're entitled to. And it was during one of these, particularly chaotic, difficult periods that I kind of looked at myself and I thought, well, if you were your own patient or your own client, what would you suggest? And, it was in that moment I realized that it's very hard to live your own advice. But I thought I would say to somebody, please, hit the pause button for 48 hours and, don't deal with anything related to this disaster. Don't answer the phone. Don't do any emails. Just do whatever you need to rest and regroup. And that's what I did. And while I was meditating, I think on the second day, I was finally calm enough. My mind was clear enough. And I sat there kind of mindfully and quietly. And I heard my inner voice, or an inner voice, whisper 5 words, which were humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth. And I've been meditating a long time, and I've been very fortunate in having many examples of kind of intuitive insight or, spiritual flashes, if you will, of advice or guidance that I couldn't have come up with myself with my own conscious mind, or certainly not my logical mind. Couldn't have come up with these things, and it was very calming. I heard those 5 words, and I was kind of guided to write them down. And I was told that these were 5 gifts that would help me to get through, and would help me to help other people get through this disaster. This was literally a disaster, and was becoming worse. Every week it was becoming more and more threatening financially and economically, and physically debilitating to everybody. And so through the 5 gifts, I was able to kind of start working with people. And I had 2 support programs running for people in my community. One was in City Hall, the other one was at a church. And the 5 gifts were very helpful in helping people to feel calm and a little bit safer while navigating, this kind of horrible field of, treachery and financial upheaval that we all found ourselves in for a very long period of time. I mean, this is still going on after Hurricane Sandy. I mean, there were still, of 1 million people who lost their homes in Hurricane Sandy, there are still thousands who are either they're facing they never got the money to fix their house, or they had to walk away from their house, or they had to file for bankruptcy. I mean, the socioeconomic fallout from a natural disaster is something that I write about in a chapter called Financial Trauma, that we see it in Puerto Rico. We're going to hear about it in Pensacola. You're going to be hearing about it in California, even in wealthy communities like Malibu. The financial aspect of the loss has a ripple effect that impacts all areas of your life. And, it's not because of the amount of money. It's because, the loss represents everything that you've earned and everything that you've built, and sometimes everything that you've dreamed for yourself and accomplished. And suddenly it's all gone. And you don't always get the help that you need to start over in the same place.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, Puerto Rico is a good example. I mean,
Yes.
It was a year later before power was basically established to the entire island.
Right.
So I mean, you look at a year. That's like an unbelievably long time for people to go without having power. So you look at each of these different tragedies that have happened, and it just, I don't know, it's a little much. And that's why I'm so grateful we have your book, The Five Gifts, because it does help people to move through in their own way. They're able to get some insights, some assistance from your book, and being able to walk through whatever's going on. We are coming up on the year anniversary of Parkland, and I know it's an anniversary none of us want to, think about, but here we are.
No, there is research that shows that a big media presence can add a layer of trauma, and when a community has experienced, especially where children are killed, massive loss of life, but especially when it involves young people. And then there's the publicity attached. I mean, this happened with 9/11 also, that the exposure, some people, and certainly the main 5 or 7 kids from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas are exceptionally poised and confident and were able to kind of energize, an entire movement. But there is a time when grief needs to be private, for each and every one of us. And the lack of privacy when there are cameras, when, those of us who are not living in that community will be exposed to hours and hours of playback and footage of the protests and footage and images of the kids being escorted out of the school. And it's going to play over and over and over again this time of year. It will be heartbreaking for people who are directly affected by that particular tragedy. And I think, because there is something called secondary trauma or vicarious traumatization, that those of us who are, watch, look at news, and I include myself as somebody who watches the news for a couple of hours a day. I don't watch it all day, every day, but, I do like to put in a couple of hours in the evening to be, kind of well informed. The heart-wrenching emotions that are going to get triggered, the flood of emotions that will get triggered by watching those images can cause each of us to have flashbacks, to feel helpless, to feel frightened, to be startled. There's something that happens where, somebody drops a cup, in another corner of a restaurant, and you feel like you're going to jump out of your skin. Those are biological responses in the aftermath of something painful and traumatic that's happened. And I think that, millions of us will experience some kind of secondary trauma, just like when Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was testifying. Many women, including Connie Chung, wrote about flashbacks to earlier abuse that suddenly, came up that they hadn't remembered, for many, many years. So the spontaneous memories started to come back of these painful incidents of harassment and abuse for many, many, many women, including some women I had worked with over the years. And so, there is something to be aware of as we are shown video and we're shown images from the horrible events of Parkland a year ago, and that is that we really need to be kind and gentle with ourselves and stop watching if we find that we're viscerally upset, because we're normal people having normal reactions to a really horrifying situation. But there's a certain point where we need to really take care of ourselves so that we don't give in to the sense of loss and heartbreak and helplessness.
Yeah, because it is easy to get swept away with what's going on in the reporting and just take that internally. I felt it many times where it's like, gosh, it feels like it's ripping my soul apart. It's horrible.
It is. And, the fact that the images are everywhere. If you sit in a doctor's waiting room, they've got CNN on in the waiting room, or in an airport, or you see it on your cell phone, or you see it on, the person sitting opposite you on the train or the bus, and they're watching it on their tablet. It's very, very hard to tune it out. And I really recommend that, especially as we have an anniversary coming up that was a national trauma, I think, for everybody was affected by the events of Parkland, that we, give yourself a news break, turn it off for 24 to 48 hours and do something for a few minutes a day that makes you smile. Try to find something that feeds your soul and, focus on that, because the heartache, it is a genuine reaction, but we don't need to keep, being visually reminded of events that are going to possibly cause us to become depressed or to feel anxious. Because there's already an epidemic of anxiety right now, and the anxiety levels are up. I think it's 47% over 2017. That's how uncertain and unsettled the turbulence in the atmosphere has become, both the natural, the environmental atmosphere, political atmosphere, financial atmosphere, and the general psychological climate is very, very unsteady right now. So turn it off and do something that helps you to feel centered, even for a few minutes, and it will really help.
Yeah, because there's just so much of that out there, and it's like you have to kind of guard yourself in some ways. It's not to be unaware of what's happening, but really kind of guard yourself in what is what you allow in, because it can get overwhelming.
It can get overwhelming, and then when you feel overwhelmed, then you don't really have your best self available, for whatever it is that you like to do or whatever it is that you need to do. So self-care is really, really critical at this point. I have in the book, I have some techniques that I call emotional first aid exercises. They work very, very quickly. Sometimes it's as simple as noticing where in your body you're feeling overwhelmed or upset, and kind of tuning in and breathing in a soothing color, and let that color find its way, whether it's, knot in your stomach or whether it's, tension at the back of your neck, and just let that color kind of find its way and start to bring comfort and release tension. And then as you exhale, you can let go of anything that you don't want to feel by breathing out a different color. And you do that for a few cycles of breath, and you'll find that your shoulders drop, and suddenly you release a deep sigh, and you kind of go, and you feel a little bit safer in your own skin. And I think that's the overall goal of the 5 gifts is to help people feel safer in their own skin after these life-shattering events.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Because it really is about being able to, because we're going to have these tragedies. They're going to keep happening, unfortunately, in our country, both environmentally and man-made. And so we have to look at this in another light. And your book really helps you. Your book, The 5 Gifts, really helps people to walk through what's going on.
And thank you very much. And I hope that the book offers people a roadmap. And I know in speaking to people who have basically have survived some of these mass shooting events over the last year, and they say that that they find the book is very helpful because it kind of helps them to see kind of. It's not that everybody doesn't follow this. It's not like a linear process, but it helps people to understand that maybe 6 months later, a year later, maybe even after the first anniversary, that the responses that you're having might be unexpected. You might think, oh, well, I should be over it by now. It's the first anniversary. There's all this media hype, and there are going to be all these rituals, and people are going to talk about closure, and then you wake up the next day, and sometimes that's when the grieving really starts because you've been surviving in a state of shock for the first year. So it kind of helps to offer, I think, a psychological roadmap so that people can be more understanding and accepting of wherever it is they are in their journey.
It really is a roadmap. I really thought your book was not only very well written, but it provides so much insight, so much where people can take it and really improve their life wherever they're at, wherever they're going through. I think I have time for one more question. I know in the 5 gifts you talk about reframing a tragedy, reframing crisis. What does that mean, and why would we do that?
Well, reframing is a kind of clinical term that really helps us to find something positive in a horrifying situation. So to be able to say, okay, I would never, when we look at the gift of growth, the final gift, as I call it, is the gift of growth. It's when we're able to look back at what happened and say, I wish I had never gone through this, and I certainly would never wish it on anybody. But if I hadn't gone through it, I would never have learned what I learned, and I wouldn't be who I am today. And I'm definitely stronger, and I'm more empathetic, and I'm more resilient, and I have more to give to others and to myself. Or, I would never have taken the career path that I've taken. For some people, it's a wake-up call. It's a catalyst to kind of go into some kind of a service career or to be able to help other people who are going through tragedies. You find a lot of grassroots support organizations and communities like my hometown of Long Beach, New York, where we do a lot of outreach and collecting donations whenever there's a hurricane or a tornado in another part of the country. So I think that's what I mean by reframing is looking for what can I be learning? What is this showing me about myself and my ability to respond both in the present and in the future as a result of what I've had to go through.
Yeah. Well, that is, I think, a good note to kind of end on today, because we could talk forever. I mean, you have so much wisdom and insight in your book, The 5 Gifts.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Where could our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, thank you for asking. I am on Twitter at Dr. Laurie, on Instagram at Laurie Nadel, and I'm not on Facebook, but there is a 5 Gifts page, also on LinkedIn. But, there are links to the social media on my website, which is my name, laurienadel.com, LaurienAdel.com, or you can call me, and I really think it's very important for us to speak to each other as much as possible. My phone number is 212-560-2333. It's 212-560-2333.
Well, Laurie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and it's really my honor. Thank you so much for your interest in the 5 Gifts and in the work.
Well, thank you, Dr. Laurie. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes. The 5 Gifts is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.